Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at the Mary Celeste anatomy of a ghost ship. We're plunging right into a 150-year-old locked room historical mystery. Only, this room is floating right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Let's get right into the evidence and the physical reality of the ultimate ghost ship. So picture this. It's December 4th, 1872. The crew of a vessel named the Dei Gratia spots a ship about 400 miles east of the Azores. Its sails are partially set, but it's just moving erratically, completely without purpose or direction. For 2 whole hours, the crew just watches this silent vessel drift in the ocean swells. And when they finally send a small boarding party across, well, what they find, or actually, scratch that, what they don't find, sets off a historical mystery that has literally baffled experts for a century and a half. Okay, let's dive into this completely bizarre scene. Left absolutely undisturbed on board were 1,701 barrels of cargo, clothing, razors, plenty of food and fresh water, and even the captain's logbook. Everything was exactly where it should be, but chillingly missing the ship's lifeboat, its vital navigational tools, so a chronometer and a sextant, and, most importantly, 10 living, breathing human beings. There was no blood, zero sign of a struggle. The ship was fully seaworthy. It's just this terrifying juxtaposition, a perfectly normal, functional space that is completely, inexplicably void of human life. Now, to understand how totally baffling this is, we have to look at who those 10 people actually were. The ship was commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs. He brought his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7 highly experienced men. And Briggs, he was absolutely not a reckless risk-taker. People who knew him described him as deeply religious, highly competent, and incredibly conservative. In fact, he considered this particular voyage to Italy so routine, so incredibly safe, that he brought his toddler along. He simply wasn't the kind of guy to panic or make some irrational split-second decision to abandon his ship. Let's trace their final known steps on the timeline here. So, they depart New York Harbor on November 7th. Everything is fine. The last entry in Captain Briggs's logbook is dated November 25th. And it's completely routine. Just a regular day at sea, about 100 miles west of the Azores, with absolutely no hint of danger whatsoever. Then, nothing. Total silence. Until December 4th, when the ship is discovered empty. That leaves us with 9 blank days. Somewhere in that terrifying window, 10 people simply ceased to exist. So we really have to treat the Mary Celeste like a crime scene. Let's look at the physical evidence that the boarding party found. The cargo hatches were removed and lying on the deck. There was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, which I know sounds alarming, but actually wasn't dangerous for a vessel of that size. A water pump had been rigged, and ominously, a rope was found trailing in the water behind the ship. And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the mystery. This wasn't utter chaos. Taking the navigational tools and rigging a pump, that points to a rapid but relatively organized evacuation. They left in a real hurry, for sure, but they had a plan. Of course, human nature always looks for a villain, right? In early 1873, the British Vice Admiralty Court in Gibraltar conducted this massive investigation, and investigators were highly suspicious of the Dei Gratia's crew. The captain of the Dei Gratia actually knew Benjamin Briggs personally, and claiming salvage rights to an abandoned ship was highly, highly lucrative. The court found what looked like bloodstains and a sword with suspicious marks, which naturally led to these wild theories of mutiny, murder, and salvage fraud. But the reality? The Attorney General who examined the forensic evidence found it completely unconvincing. The stains might not have even been blood. They ultimately recorded an open verdict, which is essentially a fancy legal way of saying, yeah, we have absolutely no idea what happened here. So if we strip away the murder theories, we have to look at what was actually on the ship. 1701. That is the exact number of barrels sitting in the Mary Celeste's cargo hold. And to put that into perspective, this wasn't drinking alcohol. This was denatured industrial alcohol. It's a highly volatile substance. It produces incredibly dangerous, highly flammable vapor. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that out of those 1,701 barrels, exactly 9 had been made from red oak instead of the usual white oak. Red oak is far more porous, and when investigators checked the hold back in Gibraltar, exactly those 9 red oak barrels were completely empty. Something had caused them to leak. And this tiny, seemingly insignificant physical detail actually birthed the most widely accepted theory among maritime historians today. Let's logically walk through how this likely played out. Step 1. Those porous red oak barrels leak volatile industrial alcohol into the sealed cargo hold. Step 2. During the voyage, these highly combustible fumes build up. Step 3. At some point, the crew opens the main hatch.
they're immediately met with a terrifying rush of expanding vapor, maybe even accompanied by a small, visible flash of combustion. It's definitely enough to make a cautious captain believe his ship is a literal ticking time bomb. So step 4. Captain Briggs orders an immediate, temporary evacuation. Everyone gets into the lifeboat, and they tether it to the Mary Celeste using that trailing rope we found earlier, fully intending to wait at a safe distance for the fumes to clear. But then, step 5. Something goes wrong. The rope snaps, or maybe a sudden wind catches the ship's sails. The Mary Celeste drifts away way faster than the crew can row back, leaving 10 people stranded in a tiny boat in the middle of the ocean. It's a remarkably coherent theory, right?
But hold on a second. If this theory is so perfect, why does the physical evidence completely contradict it? Think about it. If they were terrified of an imminent explosion, why did they take the time to grab vital navigational tools but deliberately leave the captain's logbook behind? A careful, experienced captain simply does not abandon his logbook. And more importantly, if there was a vapor flash or some explosion that terrified them off the ship, why was there zero physical evidence of combustion anywhere? No scorching, no soot, absolutely nothing. Suddenly, our perfectly logical historical mystery falls apart all over again. Now, in the absence of hard facts, human beings inevitably invent stories. I want to share a surprising detail with you as a bit of a palate cleanser here. If you've ever heard the famous ghost stories about the Mary Celeste, the spooky tales of hot food still sitting on the dining table, half-eaten meals, pipes still warm and smoking in the crew quarters, just forget them. None of that happened. Those details never existed in the actual record. They were completely fabricated in 1884 by a young writer who published a highly sensationalized, totally fictionalized version of the story. That writer's name? Arthur Conan Doyle, the future creator of Sherlock Holmes. He practically single-handedly invented the pop culture myth of the ghost ship. But you see, the real mystery, when you strip away all of Arthur Conan Doyle's fictional embellishments, is actually far stranger and much more unsettling. A sudden catastrophe, like a sea monster or a massive instantaneous explosion, is terrifying, sure, but it makes sense to us. It's comprehensible. As the source text brilliantly points out, the reality suggests something different. They chose to leave. They literally had the time to make a deliberate decision. A cautious captain, leading an experienced crew, packed his wife and his toddler into a small boat and voluntarily stepped off a perfectly good seaworthy ship. That psychological reality, that is what truly gets under your skin. So, after 150 years of intense scrutiny from courts, historians, and generations of researchers, all we really have are educated guesses. We have the alcohol vapor theory. We have theories about violent waterspouts or tornadoes at sea temporarily scaring the crew. But honestly, none of them fully explain the physical reality of what was left behind. As any good investigator knows, the pieces that don't fit are precisely the pieces that matter most. The lack of wreckage, the abandoned logbook, the rigged water pump, they just don't add up to one cohesive picture. The Atlantic Ocean is vast, and it keeps its secrets remarkably well. The Mary Celeste is famous only because the ship actually survived to give us a puzzle to solve. But it leaves us with one final, deeply chilling thought to take away from this explainer. If one of the most thoroughly investigated maritime mysteries in history still offers nothing more certain than an educated guess, well, how many other ships have simply disappeared into those exact same waters, with no one left behind to even tell us something went wrong?